Happy 4th of July, folks. Happy 4th of July. I want to, today's program is going to be an amalgamation of several important outtakes that we've done on Politics Done Right. And we ended with the one and only Thom Hartmann. But before we get started, I want to say this is a special day. Not just that it's the independence of the now most powerful country in the world. It's the Independence Day of the country, that we all have the opportunity, that we all have the requirement, that we all have the responsibility to have it live up to all that people preach that it is. While it has always been these things for a particular sect in America, it has not been for a large plurality of the country. So in celebrating this day, in being a very patriotic American, in loving this country, let's make sure to make this country live up to exactly who we say that we are. That shouldn't be difficult if we all do it together.
Right now, the way the media describe things, it makes people get introspective. They look at their bills from last year and look at it this year, and you know what? It is higher. Their bills are higher. But you know what happened during the pandemic? They were able to save because We the People society decided that we were going to take care of our own, everybody. We decided as a society that when we have downturns, we'll take care of each other through our public system, right? And we did. We had the stimulus. We had all these we had the vaccines that everybody got access to right away. We had some cash given to those kids who were taken out of poverty. We did a lot, okay? Because we didn't want what happened in 2008 to occur. It took a hell of a long time to get out of that downturn that was created by capitalism. That's what that big downturn in 2008 created by the excesses of capitalism. In fact, those people thought that capitalism was going to die there because finally the house of cards fell. But in effect, what we had is a government who propped back up that sector to continue doing all the damage that it has done, and we get the cyclicality of what occurs. So that's that. Now we had this pandemic, and what happens? We're saying we are not going to allow what occurred in 2008, a 10-year ramp up to 3% employment again. We're not going to allow that. What we're going to do is we're going to do what Keynesian economics says. And Sister Jen, I see you keep talking stuff. Listen and learn, please. What we said we were going to do is we said we were going to influx the economy with the liquidity it needed so that it doesn't climb up on itself. In software, we call it a deadly embrace. A deadly embrace is where you can't get out of stuff and you spiral down. So we didn't allow that. So we pumped the economy up with stimulus. And you know what? It worked. And if you doubt that it worked, I want you to listen to this. I'm not going to say people are not in pain, because there are a lot of people that are in pain because the GOP and 2 Democratic senators are holding us hostage. Joe Manchin, Christine Sinema, and the entire Republican Party is holding the middle class hostage. And I want to let you listen to this here, and then we'll take it on the other side, because this is the reality. These aren't questions. This is the reality.
90% of House Republicans voted against a bill that would address those supply chain issues while only offering criticism of the administration's handling of a major economic issue. But despite supply chain issues like the one plaguing baby formula and high inflation that is dominating the current discourse about the economy, the Federal Reserve's annual report on households released today shows that self-reported financial well-being is at its highest level since the survey began in 2013. In the fourth quarter of last year, 78% of adults reported either doing okay or living comfortably financially. This as unemployment hit a pre-pandemic low of 3.6% and wage growth continues. Joining us now is Betsy Stevenson, professor of economics at the University of Michigan. She was the chief economist for the U.S. Department of Labor under Barack Obama from 2010 to 2011. Good to see you again. Thank you for being with us, Betsy. There's stuff going on out there in the ether that's real. Prices are up. And people see prices every day. It has an impact on how they feel about things, how they feel about politics, how they feel about the country. But it's with us because of a whole bunch of things. We've got supply chain crushes still from the pandemic. We've got high oil prices, largely because of the war in Ukraine. How should people think about this?
What happened was the government responded to the pandemic by making sure households could pay their bills, could put food on the table, that people didn't really get left behind. And it worked. If you look at the 2008 recession, it took us 8 years to get unemployment below 4%. We were able to do that in less than 2 years this time. And what we've seen in this recent survey is that people took some of that extra money they were given and they said, I don't need to spend all of it right now. And they saved it. And what that means is we have the highest share of households who tell us that they could cover an emergency expense of $400 than we've seen since the survey began in 2013. The highest share of households who say they could cover 3 months of expenses if something bad happened. Households need this kind of cushion, and we saw that giving them support gave them this kind of cushion. Let's turn to the bad part. It's really hard to get these numbers precisely right. Exactly how much money should we have given households where they spent what they needed, saved the rest, and didn't go chasing things where we just didn't have enough supply. And so what happened is people got a little bit of extra money and they wanted things like cars, and we didn't have cars to give them because of supply chain problems. So that pushed up the price of used cars 40% as people went chasing cars that didn't exist. Millennials started feeling more comfortable. Maybe it's time to buy a home. We didn't increase the number of houses available. We had low interest rates. People had a lot of money, pushed the prices of houses up. We also had people trying to relocate around the country because they were able to work from home for the first time. Again, recent research showed that being able to work from home is responsible for a large share of the increase in housing prices as people sort of moved and reshuffled around to take advantage of that. So we have a problem, which is supply constraints mean that sellers can't respond as quickly as they normally do to increase supply. And we've got all of these households that have a lot of cash. The end result is inflation. That's not the biggest reason we have inflation, though. The biggest reason we have inflation is energy prices, and that's on Putin.
The biggest cause of inflation is, in fact, energy prices that falls through. And then here's what the killer of that I want to mention. The energy prices are not high because of shortages. It is high because the companies have pricing power. It's high because we have a lot of excess global oil floating on super tankers around the world, with oil companies pressuring their politicians not to allow that oil because they came from the wrong countries, right? So let's be clear here. This inflation is manufactured. Are there shortages? Yes. Are there shortages on enough things to create a generalized high inflation? No. Oil should not be at the price that it is. That would have dropped in inflation. Food should not be at the price that it is. That would have dropped inflation. And also, we should start making the capitalist system pay for its fraudulent behavior. They're the ones who decided to underpay American workers or not pay American workers and move their production overseas, and at the same time use just-in-time inventory, which means that with just-in-time inventory, if there is a slight delay, a pandemic, large delay in this case, or any one of these disruptions, you affect the entire supply chain. That isn't on government. That is on the private sector. That isn't on government. That is what they decided to do. The private sector, the corporatocracy, because of all it seeks is profits without humanity. And I'm not even overblowing this. That is what they do. Solution is either disrupt it and have true free enterprise or institute such strong regulation that X amount of product has to be created in country. Create all kinds of regulations that forces us not to fall into the trap that private sector puts us in.
Let me get to the Houston Chronicle article. Why are POC so upset? Why are black people so upset? Why are Latinos so upset? I'll tell you why. There's an article that came out yesterday. People wonder why is it, I've had people all over the place. They've called me the N-word, doing this kind of work. N-word, all kinds of things that I don't let it bother me. In fact, I try to befriend them. I try to see where their heads are, where they're coming from. I try to be the person that's going to look beyond. Because I understand most of this stuff is generated by ignorance and so forth. So anyhow, I read this article. It's a Houston Chronicle article. The title was, Some Texas religious leaders live in lavish tax-free estates thanks to obscure laws. So we know who the rich churches are mostly. And again, I don't want to be racial here, but in this case, I must. Most of these big, mega rich churches, there are a lot of black and Latino mega churches as well. But most of these mega churches, you know who the culprits are, and they take all these great tax advantages. And here in Texas, the Houston Chronicle decided that it was going to do a story, and not only a story, a series on the issue. So I was excited. I'm not one of those church-going people who lavish themselves or praises the church. I know the church has a lot of evil in it, right? So anyhow, I'm reading the article and the guy did a great job. He went to the tax assessor collectors. He figured out what homes were not paying taxes, which preachers lived in mansions and all these great things. And it's like, wow, that is great. He's doing the right thing. And he's not naming preachers per se, but he's naming organizations, etc., 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 right? And then it happened, right? When it is time to give a representative example of a church pastor taking advantage of the tax system. In other words, what is commonly known to what everybody wants people to believe is, living on the dole. Who is the first by name preacher on the negative side? I digress. The article first decides to praise two preachers. I want to read this part of the article. Remember, the article is talking a lot about these guys that don't pay their taxes. They live in these big mansions and gated communities. These are all preachers. And in Texas, they have a parsonage law that they live by that allows the pastors not to have to pay taxes on their residences, etc. So they build mega mansions with your mega dollars and your mega tax break. So here's how it goes now. This passage says it all. It doesn't look racist. It doesn't look like they're picking stuff. But when you look at it in the aggregate, the subliminal message that goes out is which preachers are on the dole. And it carries out the stereotype. And I want you guys to tell me if you don't see it. Look at this. Everybody know who Osteen is. Osteen is that mega preacher in Texas, has this prosperity gospel, makes a lot of money. He's the guy who didn't open the door when the hurricane hit until he was embarrassed into opening the door. By the way, I do like his messages when he starts talking a lot about prosperity stuff. He has some good messages. But again, preacher, Osteen, he has a big problem. And the other one is Hagee from San Antonio. Hagee, we all know is I don't want to call him a racist, but Hagee's a guy who's hate homosexuals, who hate everybody else and has a lot of other problems. But that's who this article decided to highlight as the ones that are good in paying tax. I want to read the article now. I just needed to give some context there. It says the following. Well-off religious organizations that clearly have the means to afford their taxes don't have to seek the exemption. Lakewood Church did not ask the Harris County appraiser for a tax break on the 15,000 square foot residence of the state's most famous prosperity gospel preacher, Joel Osteen. His annual tax bill comes to $218,000 a year, according to the county. Osteen, who hasn't taken a salary since 2004, believes it's important for donors to know all their money goes to the church, said the brother-in-law, Don Olive. He could take the parsonage break, Olive said, but he pays his property taxes, just like he's supposed to do. Property records also show that San Antonio Cornerstone Church didn't seek an exemption for any clergy residences in Bexar County. Appraisals records show its well-known spiritual leader, John Hagee, pays $42,000 annually in property taxes. A spokesman said the matter was personal and declined to comment, but he pays his taxes. So here, these two controversial white pastors, they pay their taxes on their property taxes. But let's continue. But Harris County Appraisal District documents show New Light Church World Outreach and Worship Centers pay no taxes on its 25,000 square foot mansion in Spring, perched on the shore of a private lake and occupied by its high-profile leader, I.V. Hilliard. The 11.8 lot includes 3 hot tubs, 2 fountains, and a swimming pool. Who else did they pick on? Let me see. 2 controversial white preachers they lift up as being good tax-paying preachers. His name is, ¿cómo se llama? Ivan Uhueta, devoted to youth mastering. He didn't pay his property taxes. So the 2 that they highlighted for paying their property taxes, 2 controversial white preachers, but when they are wanting to show preachers living extravagantly without paying their taxes, they chose Hilliard and Ulueta. I wonder, did they check on the Second Baptist Church, which has several mega churches in the area and whose pastor hates paying taxes, is a great supporter of the Republican Party, and is trying to eliminate taxes altogether? Did they consider checking on that? I doubt it. But that is what I'm talking about. It's always, whenever they're making these cases, in as much as POCs are not the protagonists of all the deceit, are not the protagonists of the ones spending the money or causing the most pain, somehow they are going to be the ones that are highlighted. The same thing occurred when we talk about the coronavirus. They stopped traffic from all of Southern Africa, not just South Africa, but all these other countries that have the Mycoran strain. Not a problem. You can still come to the United States. It's always easier to hit the POCs, right? Forget this picture here. Check it out on the screen, folks. That is the Ugandan activist who was out there with the Norwegian activists and 4 others. When the AP reported that there were these youths out there to defend the climate, the top picture is what everybody saw. Unbeknownst to them, cropped out was that Ugandan girl who works very hard in the climate movement, just like Trunden does. Think about that. So, one of the titles of the piece today was, Our Media Creates Racists. And I really mean that. A lot of people infer much from what they hear on the media. And when the media does things like this, I mean, it seems subtle. It doesn't seem like it's something that is really there, but it is there. It is the subliminal messages that are sent. Climate change, fighters for climate change. We are going to make climate better. We have the youth fighting. And they don't know. A lot of African youths are in there too, including this Ugandan girl, Nakete. I think it's Nakete is her name. But we don't hear about them. And when they're in Switzerland or Davos or wherever they were, taking pictures together, when it was time for the Vanessa Nakrate, thank you very much, Nakate, thank you very much, Rodney. When it was time for the picture to go out for the world to see, they cropped her out. What did the reporter at the Houston Chronicle do? They cropped them out. They cropped 2 religious guys who have a problem and lift them up as being the supporters and defenders of paying their taxes. And when it was time to show 2 who didn't pay their taxes, they showed a Latino and they showed an African American. Now, they don't come out and they don't have to say anything. What's in your mind is that message that has been promoted to you over and over and over again. POCs on the dole. Others upstanding, taking care of business. It's not quite evident. You don't see it. They don't have to come out and tell it to you. It's the same thing that they did when the former leader of the Republican Party said, we don't use the N-words anymore. We just use phrases that codify who these people are. That's all we do now. Maywood says, unfortunately, that's only too true, Egberto. It may not be intentional, but the net effect is the same. Let me tell you right here and there for these reporters at the Chronicle, it was intentional. And let me tell you what I mean by intentional. They wanted their article to have faces to preachers that people could recognize as doing wrong. And in order to do that, they decided to show a Latino and a Black, in as much as all the wealthy preachers in Harris County, the vast majority, don't look like Ulueta or Hilliard. It's just that simple. Let's go to the student loan, and then I have a soliloquy I want to do on the student loan. So let's go with the student loan, then comes my soliloquy that you're going to listen to.
And we have breaking news from the White House. The president has just announced he's extending the pause on federal student loan repayments. NBC's Monica Alba is back with me from the White House. Monica, we didn't let you get away very far. A lot of news coming today. Talk to me about the student loans and just extending this. It was supposed to expire January 31st.
This is a really significant development, Andrea. When the president first came into office, he directed the payments be put on pause through August. Then later in the summer, they determined they were going to extend that again as Delta was surging to the end of January, as you point out. And now the president is saying an additional 90 days will go into effect for this pause. So this punts it all the way to May 1st, 2022. And of course, this is something that the administration had been under pressure to make a decision about, given what we're seeing with the economy. And this affects more than 41 million Americans who really felt they wanted this breathing room to continue to figure out what the president and this administration may do overall when it comes to student loans. And it is something that the Department of Education is reviewing with borrowers to see if they're going to make some changes. Of course, there have been many advocates, many Democratic lawmakers even, who've asked the president to consider forgiving up to a certain amount of these loans, potentially $10,000, maybe more. Some have called, of course, for the entirety of it. So this just gives the president, the White House, and the Department of Education more time to figure that out, while people, again, take more time, given, of course, all of the pressure and the unknowns of what the Omicron variant will mean for our uneven economic recovery, Andrea.
So as it turns out, we got another 90-day reprieve for all our young people with debt. Well, actually with everybody who has student debts. Let me talk about student loan. This is important. I have an open discussion with a darn good friend of mine, a professor here at the university, a very good friend of mine. And it's amazing that when I'm thinking, sometimes I can't even remember names, right? Professor Jay, all right? Jay Tice. He told me that I needed to be careful the way I pushed student loan forgiveness. And he made a great case. And the great case he made had to do with all those folks in Appalachia that never took advantage of student loans. They just went ahead and didn't go to college. And he spoke about all these people in these different parts of the countries who pretty much would not get the benefit of getting that break, that student loan break, and that the Republicans could use that as a hammer to say, look at these elitists on the coast giving themselves all these tax breaks for these kids who went to school. And, you know, after he told me that, I had to think about it and think about it and think about it. And he's partially right. But you cannot go with partially right when something is absolutely right. We allowed all these governments, state governments, to give breaks to corporations. We allowed all these state governments to cut their support for public state schools. And then it meant those who wanted a higher education had to spend more for that education. You can say, well, yeah, they're the ones who are going to benefit from the higher salaries from that education. True. So I want them to share a responsibility of that education. But you know who benefits the most from an educated populace? The plutocracy, the owners of Exxon, the owners of all these other things. Okay? They are the ones who benefit from an educated population. So they owe it to America to pay for those schools. Because remember, when they offloaded all of that into loans, they get you twice. Corporations lend you the money. After corporations lend you the money, they profit from the interest rates that you pay to pay back that money. And then the corporations make money on your excess labor, meaning you go ahead and you work for corporation X, you design a parachute or you design an airfoil, you design a wing, and they make X amount of dollars on your design. They pay you a bit and they profit the rest. So everybody is making a profit on you. I'm not saying you shouldn't partake in your education, but it should be shared. And that's what student loan forgiveness is all about. Student loan forgiveness is saying for those people, and by the way, if somebody in Appalachia wants to step out and go to college like many do it. If somebody in the ghetto, the barrios, and everywhere else want to do it. But it is important for us to understand how our economic system works so that when we come and talk about we want to have loan forgiveness, it doesn't look like when I wrote the first part of this story and I put it on YouTube as a video on YouTube, somebody said, Egberto, you freeloader, pay your damn bills yourself. I don't want to pay your bills. To which I replied to him is, I am not in this fight for me. My student loan was paid off 10 years after I got out of college. Every penny of it was paid off by me. Okay? So I'm not a freeloader. Most of this stuff that I'm doing, it's not, I'm doing it for Egberto. It's not the case. But I'm saying it's not fair. First of all, it costs me a lot less to go to school than it costs my daughter, than it costs everybody else that's going to school now because our system wasn't as ripping people off as it is now. Eric says, politics done right. Egberto Willis is called a job a person used to pay your debt back. If you borrowed it, paying off your debt teaches you something about life. No, it doesn't teach you anything. If it taught you anything, why would the corporations take such good care of creating bankruptcy laws? Bankruptcy laws prevent corporations from paying debt. And I, as a small company, had to give up over $5,000 from a company who went bankrupt and didn't pay me. I want you guys to understand that. And corporations, they don't have a problem. There are corporations, they go bankrupt, they don't pay their bills, and they come back into existence without a problem.
Politics done right depends on you to keep doing what we do. What do? We make sure to keep, number one, the internet seeded with blogs and information to counter the right and to present what progressives represent for the benefit of us all to everybody so that it's not misled by any other entity. We make sure and populate that internet with blogs, with videos, with all these other things to make sure that we are informed and to counter everything that you normally hear that are lying at the right. We also make sure to create articles in magazines, articles in newspapers all around the country to ensure, again, that our message gets out there. Last but not least, we also write books. As you see it, Class Warfare, the Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom, How to Make America Utopia, are two of the many books that I've written on these issues. So please support us in one of many ways. Numero uno, you can support us at PayPal, either one time or monthly. Go to politicsdoneright.com/PayPal. You can support us on Patreon. That is politicsdoneright.com/Patreon. Patreon is spelled Patreon. You can support us by becoming a part of our YouTube channel, going to politicsdoneright.com/YouTube, or you can support us in many other forms that you can find at politicsdoneright.com/support. Be sure to visit our store, politicsdoneright.com/store, and get our books at politicsdoneright.com/books.
Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Thank you so kindly for being with us. Once again with us, Thom Hartmann, a 4-time winner of the Project Censored Award, a New York Times bestselling author of
33 books, and America's #1 progressive talk show host. His show is syndicated and on local for-profit and non-profit stations and broadcast nationwide and worldwide. It also is simulcast on television into nearly 60 million U.S. and Canadian homes. Senor Thom Hartmann, how are you doing today, my friend?
My buddy Egberto, it's great to be back with you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, look, man, I tell you, you have another one out. And you know what I told you? Every time you release one of those guys, I want to be on that list. But this one, I was let me tell you, I had to just scan the thing. But I am intrigued by several of your chapters. New book is The Hidden History of Big Brother in America. What got you into writing that, Thom?
Well, I've been fascinated with the topic, and we're certainly seeing, creeping Big Brotherism here. Not just creeping. I mean, the Patriot Act kind of blew it through a wall, and as did the Telecommunications Act of '96, the Section 230, it's altered the world. I mean, there's the corporate big brothers and in some ways the government big brothers too. So I wanted to do a deep dive into both, which we did.
Well, I mean, and you sure did. I was going through the table of contents and I'm like, wait, I would have never thought about covering this in Big Brother or covering that in Big Brother. I mean, it was quite an enlightening thing. So let me hear. Is this the last in the series, or is the series continuing, the hidden history of series?
The next one I was doing the line edit on just before I called into your show. And it's going to be titled The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Divided America and How to Restore Our Greatness. As much as I kind of cringe at greatness, I don't get to pick the titles. The publishers do. But that's what it's about. And it'll be out in September. And then that's probably going to be the last one in the series, but we'll see.
Well, that one is going to be exciting. Anytime I hear the word neoliberal, you know how we feel about that, and the kind of things that we have to do about that. Anyway, so tell me, what got you into this? I mean, the beginning, you start Big Brother and the Puritans. Why did we start there?
Well, there have been two times in American history. I mean, people think of Big Brother, they think of 1984, George Orwell's novel, in which, government is Big Brother and Big Brother's watching you and, all that kind of stuff. And there have been two periods in American history where we actually had Big Brother governments. I mean, like George Orwell style Big Brother governments. The first, well, not the first, but one of them, the first one I treat in the book, is the plight of people who were not Puritans in Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire back from the 1600s right up till the constitutional era. In fact, for this reason, Massachusetts almost didn't join the Republic.
Yeah.
And, they had laws requiring that you had to go to church. You had to pay taxes to the local church. You had to treat the church elder as if he was, the senior official in the community, with great deference and all that sort of thing. And there were these three Quaker women who just weren't having it, and they refused to go to church, and they weren't paying their taxes. And so the head, this was in Dover, New Hampshire, and John Greenleaf Whittier made it famous with a poem titled "When the Women Came from Dover," which I quote in the book. And this pastor, his name was Hate Evil Nutter. That was his name. Honest to God, his first name was Hate Evil, all one word, and his second name was Nutter, and which I suppose is enough to make you crazy. But anyway,
the Nutter part,
He felt that he was being disrespected by these women because they weren't showing up in his church. So he ordered the town constable to tie them to the back of a horse cart in the middle of winter. There was 3 feet of snow on the ground, strip them naked to the waist, whip them until they were bloody, and then drag them in the back of this cart to the next town where the process would be repeated. And this went on through 3 or 4 towns. I forget how many. It's in the book. And finally, a constable stopped. And it was a fairly well-known story that, like I said, Whittier turned into one of our one of the more famous poems in American literary history. So that was the first. The second, of course, was slavery. If a person was black in this country from 1619, arguably up to quite recently, Big Brother was watching. Big Brother was controlling. And certainly during the slavery era, up until the end of the Civil War, the South was a complete police state. You cannot, and you and I have talked about this before when an oligarchy came out, you cannot enforce slavery without a police state. It's an absolute necessity. But by 1840, as a result of the invention of the cotton gin and its high price, so only big plantations could buy one, and it made a plantation 50 times more productive in terms of cleaning cotton. Because of that, by the 1840s, the South had become an oligarchy, just a fascist state. Elections were meaningless. Ballot boxes were stuffed. The people who could run for election were only members of the roughly 1,000 oligarchic families in the South who owned basically the South. Everybody elected to any kind of political office of any consequence was from one of these families. If you were white and you defied these families, you could get hanged, you could get whipped, you could get imprisoned, you could get driven out of the states. And so really, the Civil War was not a war between the North and South. It was the war between a fascist oligarchy in the South that no longer had any loyalty to democracy whatsoever against a Republican democracy in the North, at least to the extent that it was, with men voting and not women, and by and large not black people voting also. But still, it was that those were the two systems. And so that was our second Big Brother era. And then,
before you go to the next one, because there's something that kind of puzzled me when I was scanning through the book, right? And the chapter that came out to me was Big Brother invents whiteness to keep power. And it is something that before reading your book, I would talk about on my station, particularly telling people, hey, this was designed for some to keep power. It wasn't designed for white people. It was designed for some to hold power. And when I saw that you brought that into the fold, it was like, oh, wow. Yeah, Tom, why don't you elaborate on that for me?
Well, thank you. I can't claim originality to that. I learned it from the 1619 Project and several other books that were written around that time. But basically what was happening is, starting in 1619, slavery was a thing here in North America. And by the middle of the early 1600s, the 1630s, if I'm remembering correctly, and I would refer you to Nicole Hannah-Jones's book.
Yeah, Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Yeah. But around that time, poor whites, first of all, many of the Africans who were brought over were just one generation of slavery, or it was impressment, or it was I forget the word for where you have to pay back your fare.
Indentured servitude.
Indentured servitude. Thank you. Bless you. And that was the case with many of the white people who came to this country as well. And so they were finding common purpose with each other. And there were a number of rebellions that were black and white rebellions against rich people. And so the good fathers of Virginia, specifically in the 1630s, as I recall, in fact, I think 1636 was the big year for it, but it's been a year since I wrote the book. I'd have to go back and look at it. Basically they said, okay, we're going to enforce this caste system, but we're going to do it the lazy way. We're going to make it so that, anybody, you can just instantly look at them and know which caste they are in America. And thus they literally invented whiteness. I mean, slavery had existed forever in history. The Romans had slaves, the Greeks had slaves, but their slaves looked just like them. Right. I mean, occasionally they'd take slaves from nearby people that they had conquered. So maybe the slaves spoke a different language or looked slightly different from them. But by and large, slavery was not a racial thing. But we invented that. America invented that. Virginia invented whiteness, and it still haunts us. And now it's spread around the world like the poison that it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we move on now from the social aspect and we hit the corporate aspect of Big Brother, I think if you follow your lead, that is probably one of the most corrosive and dangerous portions of this.
I think so, because in particular, or what amplifies it is the Supreme Court saying that corporations are persons and that persons can buy politicians, and that it's all just free speech, political bribery.
I want to stop you right there because I want to tell you, I met you during the Move to Amend days and the Coffee Party days.
I remember.
You were one of the huge advocates that came out there and spoke to us about people, personhood, and all of that. So I want to give you a late thanks on that because that was an important thing then.
Well, thank you, Egberto. Yeah, I wrote a book about it called Unequal Protection in 2002. The subtitle was How Corporations Became Persons. And so, it's particularly problematic when corporations not only have the ability to own politicians, write their own legislation, but can also, basically know everything about you. We really don't know if any corporations have done what J. Edgar Hoover did. I mean, I mentioned in the book that Hoover, in fact, very early in the book, that Hoover was, a gay man at the political pinnacle of power, and at a time in the United States in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, when just simply being gay was enough to get you imprisoned or murdered. And but he used political spying, Big Brother, government spying, to compile dossiers on virtually every politician and business leader who might ever challenge him. And, right up until 1960, in fact, because he was being blackmailed by Santo Trafficati down in Miami, he and Clyde Tolson used to go down to Hialeah and gamble, and Trafficati would give them money and young boys and access to the racetrack and things, and give them rooms in the hotel. Trafficati was blackmailing him. And so he was denying that there was even such a thing as organized crime right up until 1960. That year, there were only, I think, 17 prosecutions for organized crime in the United States. Then Bobby and John Kennedy came in, and Bobby in 61, the first year, had over 700 prosecutions of organized crime, which is when Trafficati and Marcello found their backs to the wall and decided that they were going to do something about the Kennedys. But that's kind of a whole nother book that I wrote a number of other years ago.
I'm going to be interested in that offshoot, the Kennedys and the mob. But go ahead.
That book is called Legacy of Secrecy that I co-wrote with Lamar Waldron. And it's about, both Kennedy assassinations and the Martin Luther King assassination. But I forgot where we were.
No, that's how we're talking about the corporations and
yeah. And so, I don't know if any corporations have compiled dossiers on particular members of Congress and said, if you don't say something, this might get out. But we live in a time when it's a very real possibility. I actually don't even present that as a possibility in the book. I'm just speculating with you right now. But
Thom, I don't see how it's not. Again, we're just talking about speculation, and you wouldn't be able to put that in a book. I understand that, but it's not hard to believe how these guys come up with certain laws that they know the average American citizen simply don't want, unless that's the case.
Yeah. I've assumed up until recently that, when legislators are passing laws that they know most people don't want and that they know are going to be harmful to America and Americans, that they're doing it because they've been bought, because they've been paid off. But it's not inconceivable that they're being blackmailed as well. I just think that that's less likely. That's the kind of thing that, well, I was going to say that's the kind of thing that would probably get out. But, Hoover's blackmail of everybody didn't get out until after he died.
Exactly.
So
exactly. So you never know about that. So when it comes to, you also link capitalism in there. I personally think that capitalism needs all these types of coercions, and absent these coercions, you can't have a system as we have it at the same as where it really is abusive to people. And at the same time, people tolerate it, and therefore coercion is necessary. Your thoughts on that relative to what you've written?
By coercion, what do you mean?
Well, you cannot have people work themselves off for the profit of others and not complain about it. You cannot have people who simply say, come out to the defense of, let's say, the real capitalists, as they do, if they're not coerced into the thought process that have them doing that. And I think in a lot of ways, knowing our internals probably presents that case.
Yeah, well, you make a good argument for it. I mean, again, I think that it's not so much that if a group of people want to unionize, that Amazon is spying on their
That's
purchasing
another point.
history, and they're going to use it against them. I think it's more that Amazon will simply hire union busters to come in and scare the hell out of them. I think that the big club here right now is money, not implied or even direct coercion.
Oh, so you think it's mostly? But let me ask you this then, Thom.
I don't know.
Let's push that a little further.
Sure.
It's money. Okay, how does the money get one to do what they need to do?
Well, money is a form of coercion. I mean, if you don't have enough to eat, money is food. If you don't have a place to stay, money is shelter. If you don't have, the clothing you need to protect yourself from elements when winter comes, money is survival. And in addition to all the things that we generally think of it as, as status and as leisure and as, whatever. And so I think that you can build a strong case. And frankly, this is the case that was built back in the 1930s to come up with the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act in 1935, to legalize unions. You could build a strong case that the power that an employer has over a non-unionized employee is extraordinary, particularly during a time of widespread poverty, which was very much the 1930s, and is increasingly America today, sadly. So, yeah, I think we could frame it entirely in a coercion frame.
It is amazing that because I did a piece 2 days ago with Larry Summers, and Larry Summers appeared on TV, and I'm going to tie this into your book, but Larry Summers came on and he explained he thought he was explaining to what I call a naive audience that after you've gotten 4% or so in wage increases, that it automatically generates inflation that actually takes back more than your increased income was. And then he starts
crap.
I know. And then he starts to bring up and he says, and by the way, Ukraine creates a lot of wheat. So therefore there's going to be a lot of transportation. We can overproduce more oil if we wanted to, which means from US ports, we'll have ships going from US ports with this oil to deliver whatever. So he intermingled in there, and we're going to have to start thinking about having ships not follow the Jones Act and go and simply go to the cheapest shipper. So he attacked inflation as justified, wages as being the causation of inflation, the reduction of, he in one package, right? And I'm like, talking about subliminal messaging to tell the workers, don't ask for too much. It was just amazing. And when I tie that into what we're talking about, Big Brother, it is like Big Brother telling you all these things that will occur in this scenario.
Yeah, Larry Summers is a neoliberal.
It's going good for your next book.
Yeah, it's a little too late to write him into it, but if he's not in it, I'll have to go.
He probably, I bet he's in it because he was there with Obama and when we came up, so I bet he's in there. But second thing, globalism and Big Brother. Tell me about it with respect to the book. Well, the InfoWars.
Right. It's a tough one. I mean, globalism is like, one category and Big Brother is kind of another. What's happening with regard to a global response to Big Brother, I can directly address, which is.
Right. That's what I meant. Actually, I'm going from your part 3.
Okay. So the European Union has come up with a set of basic rules, rights for people who are users of the internet. And you're seeing the consequence of this when you visit websites and they say, well, you accept cookies. The requirement is that you have to disclose things.
Mm-hmm.
People are being tracked and things like that. And there are limits on the ways and technologies that can be used to track people. There's also a really cool thing called the right to be forgotten that the European Union has now recognized, which came out of a lawsuit from a Spaniard who was very upset that his name, he had been involved in a bankruptcy back in the late 90s. And whenever anybody Googled his name, because he was a low profile guy, that was the only thing that showed up. And he wanted it to take it off the search engines. And so they're pretty vigorous about it. Plus, here in the United States, we're the only developed country in the world that allows your internet service provider, the company that's bringing the internet into your home, to observe absolutely everything they're doing online. They can watch every keystroke, read every email, look at every website you visit, even know how quickly or slowly you scroll down the page, stopping at particular pictures or headlines or ads. They know all this stuff, and they can record it and they can sell it. And so there's that. And then that's the result of Donald Trump having hired Verizon lawyer Ajit Pai as the head of the FCC and blowing up what we referred to as net neutrality. I always thought it should have been referred to as net privacy, because it was really about Title II of the Telecommunications Act, which has been used since the 1930s to say that if you want to wiretap somebody, if you want to listen on the phone conversation, you have to have a warrant signed by a judge. And up until Donald Trump and Ajit Pai got a hold of the FCC, that was the law with regard to the internet in the United States too. And it still is everywhere else in the world. So, we've got a serious privacy problem. The other big problem that has gone worldwide, but really started here in the United States, is that, let me give you a setup for this. Starting around the year 1000, around the time of the Magna Carta, 1100.
Computers then.
No computers then. There was this notion. It's sometimes referred to as the castle doctrine, that a man's castle at home is his castle. But the flip side of that is that, if it's your castle, you're responsible for what happens in it. So if you, Egberto, were to go out and put a sign out in front of your house, Saturday afternoon that says "Big party Saturday night, 10 p.m. Everybody welcome," and you leave the door open, and just every reprobate in the community comes in. So just anybody who's looking for some place they can get away with some kind of skeezy activity that nobody else would allow. So you're sitting there in your house and it's midnight and this has been going on for a while, and there's somebody in the back room getting raped, and there's somebody over here showing child porn against the TV wall, and a couple of people in the corner shooting up heroin, and the police walk in. Who goes to jail? Well, all those criminals and you, because it's in your house. You're responsible for it. And if you allow criminal activity in your home and you don't stop it or report it, you go to jail too. So like I said, that has literally been in British common law for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And it was an American law all that time. Well, in 1996, in the Telecommunications Act of 1996, Section 230, the geniuses who wrote this thought, hey, let's carve an exception into this. We'll leave it intact that, if Tom has a party in his house and terrible things happen, he can be held accountable. But if he builds a house on the internet, even if he's inviting in people, as long as he's not doing it, as long as he invites in other people who are selling child porn or who are selling drugs or who are terrorists and organizing bombings and attacks on January 6th and stuff like that, as long as it's his house, but he's not doing it, he has no responsibility at all. And thus, within a couple of years, Mark Zuckerberg became one of the richest guys in the world.
That is a shame. Without giving,
we need to do something about it. And by the way, who wrote a pretty good book about this is Josh Hawley. I mean, you've got Republicans as well as Democrats who are pretty flipped out about Section 230.
Well, weren't they trying to change that? It wasn't Congress having hearings trying to change that law?
They still are. And, at the time that Hawley wrote his book, it was when Trump was still president. And the whole sales pitch was, Facebook just took down Donald Trump. We need to regulate these big companies. But, in his book, he raises the second half of the book is just, it's about how liberals are going to destroy America. But the first half of the book is a pretty good documentation of how Section 230 has just wreaked havoc on our country.
Well, I mean, it sure has, both with the election, you name it, you got it. Without giving the end of your book, how do we rein this in? Just kind of topically, not anything in detail.
Well, I think that, number one, we need to deal with Section 230 and get that under control. Number two, we need to break up some of these giant monopolies. No one company should control 80 or 90% of an industry, like Google does with search, for example, or Facebook does with social media. Number three, we need to adopt the European privacy laws, the GDPR. I think it's the
GDP. Yeah.
Whatever it is. We need to adopt that or something like it. And California is kind of leading on that, but they can't do things that the federal government could do. And finally, we need to end the so-called net neutrality, or we need to restore net neutrality, and Ajit Pai and Donald Trump's sabotage of the Telecommunications Act and the Title II of the Telecommunications Act of 1930, whatever it was.
It's funny.
As a starting point. Plus, we need to wait
years ago
as to how they're being spied on.
And I'm still, even though Europe has better laws, I still sit down here and wonder sometimes, but do they really work? Because it's a pipe. I don't know. I think you need great laws in the front end and the back end.
I agree.
I actually wrote an article on the net neutrality for common dreams about, I don't know, years ago. And it just popped up recently. And I'm like, oh, I forgot about that several years ago during our move to amend days.
Oh, yeah. You were at the front of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, we were with this stuff a long, long time. Thom, first of all, folks, you guys have to go out there and get that book. And I get a lot of people on here and I don't just tell them to go get the book, but this is one. Well, every book that Thom writes, you got to get out there and get. So don't forget to go ahead. No, Thom, it's you put the stuff in there. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy. Folks, I'm going to tell you, don't only get that book, get the whole damn series, because if progressives are going to do the work that's necessary to recover all that went wrong in this country, we need these different, we need pathways. And, I love your book, the one that you did on healthcare. I mentioned that book and I promote that book all of the times, because I think it is a very, very important read. This one is a very important read, though I have only scanned it. I have to be honest about it. But again, a very important read. Thom Hartmann, thank you you know what? Thank you so kindly for the book. Thank you for appearing once again on Politics Done Right. And I cannot wait for the next one.
And thank you so much for having me, Egberto. It's always a pleasure talking with you. I always enjoy our conversations. Thank you so much.
I want to wish you a happy 4th of July. Don't forget what I said up front. Let's make this country, make it live up to who we say we are. So happy 4th of July. Go enjoy those barbecues. Go watch those fireworks in a patriotic fashion, knowing that this is our country and that we will make this country the country we say that it is. Folks, please don't forget, in order to do what we do need your support. So please go to politicsdoneright.com/PayPal to offer whatever support you can, or to find all the different methods in which you can support us. politicsdoneright.com/support. Now look, we are heading to Pittsburgh for Netroots Nation 2022. Netroots Nation 2022, and we need your support. We have a GoFundMe that's set up to fund that particular endeavor, where we are going to be meeting politicians and bloggers and activists from all over the country, progressives that is, and we are going to make sure to have those interviews and bring that back to you. And not only that, with the new marching orders with how we are going to win 2022. So how can you provide us with support? How can you help us to make sure that we are funded for this trip? Please go to politicsdoneright.com/netroots. politicsdoneright.com/netroots. Help us get the message out. Help us bring all of those into the fold. We cannot do this without you. And you have consistently showed that you understand that while the others have Coke, the Koch brothers, that is, we have you. We don't need millions of dollars like they do because they're pushing lies. We just need you to help us get the truth out. So please go to politicsdoneright.com/netroots to support us. This is Politics Done Right, and you know how I'm going to end this baby. I am what? Out. We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.